The red dust of Wyoming Territory hung in the air like a curse that summer of 1871. It clung to every board of the weathered buildings in Dry Hollow, to the lips of thirsty travelers, and to the hearts of men who had long forgotten the difference between right and wrong. The town itself sat on two dried creek beds, its saloons and trading posts holding on like stubborn weeds in a desert. My Two Rivers guided his string of pack mules slowly down the main street. He squinted against the harsh glare of the afternoon sun. At 28, he had already spent half his life walking between two worlds. His mother's Lakota blood gave him sharp eyes in a hunter's patience. His father's pale skin gave him a face that confused people who liked their boundaries clear. Neither side had ever fully welcomed him, yet both had learned to rely on him. Across the saddle sat a well-oiled Winchester. Nothing fancy, nothing that drew attention. Eli had learned long ago that the best gunmen were the ones no one noticed. He had built a reputation as a scout who delivered results without boasting. Good enough to trust, not so good that young bravos came chasing him for glory. That balance had kept him alive. Water, croaked a voice from the shadows of Henderson's dry goods store. An old prospector stumbled into the light, more dust than man. His cracked lips shook as he begged. Just a sip. Friend Eli reached for his canteen. It was nearly empty, but still held a few swallows. Before he could pass it over, a woman stepped out of the store. Her gray dress was plain, but spotless despite the dust. She carried a full water bottle and pressed it into the prospector's trembling hands. "Drink slow, Mr. Garrett," she said gently. "There's more inside if you need it." The old man's eyes filled with tears as he drank. Eli noticed the black band sewn on the woman's sleeve. A widow. She watched to be sure the prospector did not choke, then offered him bread before sending him inside. Her gaze turned on Eli. Green eyes, sharp as frost, studied him with careful judgment. She could not have been more than 25. Yet those eyes told of hardships faced and endured. Mrs. Crane, Eli said, tipping his hat. He knew her name. Isadora Crane, the Eastern woman who had married Timothy Crane and followed him west to Willow Draw. 6 months ago, her husband had been thrown from a spooked horse, leaving her to manage a ranch with the best water rights in the valley. "Mr. Two Rivers," she replied politely, though her tone held caution. "I heard you were back from Fort Laramie." Before Eli could answer, the drumming of hooves rolled through the street. 6 riders stormed into town, dust swirling behind them. At their head was Pete Harlan, foreman for the powerful DVO Cattle Company. His kind believed fear and respect were the same thing, and both could be bought with a gun. Harlan's men spread out in a circle that cut off escape. Eli stayed still, hands easy on the res. Harlan's pig's small eyes fixed not on him, but on the widow. "Afternoon, Mrs. Crane," he said with a grin that showed teeth, but no kindness. "Mr. DVO sends his regards in another offer." The answer remains, "No, Mr. Harlan," Isadora said. Her voice was calm, but Eli saw her hand tremble slightly as she smoothed her skirt. "Now that's a shame," Harlan drawled. "Mr. DVO is patient, but not forever. That water of yours could help a lot of people." "Seems selfish. A woman alone hoarding it." "I am not hoarding anything," she answered firmly. 17 families draw from Willow Creek under the agreement my husband made. Mr. DeVoe's idea of a lot of people seems to begin and end with himself. One of Harlan's men, a scar-faced youth, pushed his horse forward. "Maybe you need help understanding the situation better." The threat hung heavy in the air. Eli shifted in his saddle. The movement was slight, but enough for Harlan to notice. "This your business breed?" "Just passing through," Eli said mildly. "Hate to see a lady bothered on such a hot day." Harlan's eyes narrowed. 6 against 1 was good odds, but not against a scout who could put a bullet through your skull at 200 yards. And not when that scout might be needed for a cattle drive in the fall. "We'll be back for your answer soon," Harlan finally said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. The riders wheeled and thundered away, leaving a cloud of dust and dread. Isadora stood tall until they disappeared, then sagged against the storefront. "Thank you," she murmured. "Didn't do anything but sit here," Eli replied. "Sometimes that's enough." Her eyes searched his face. "You're the scout who guided those missionary families through Sioux country last winter. They said you were trustworthy. Quote, just did the job I was paid for." "No," she said firmly. "You went without food so their children could eat. That's more than a job." Eli had no answer, so he stayed silent. At last, she spoke again. "Mr. Two Rivers, I need supplies taken to Willow Draw. The usual drivers suddenly refused to work for me. I pay fair wages." Eli knew he should say no. Staying neutral kept him alive. But something about this woman who faced down armed men with nothing but pride and principle reminded him of his mother standing between her children and the officials who tried to take them. "I'm headed that way," he heard himself say. "I'll take your supplies." Relief flickered across her face before she masked it. "Thank you. I'll have everything ready within the hour." As they loaded the wagon together, Eli noticed details. The careful mending on her dress, the calluses on her hands, the ease with which she hefted heavy sacks. She was no helpless flower. She was fighting to keep what was hers. "Mrs. Crane," Eli said as the last sack was tied down, Harlan meant those threats. "DVO has been squeezing out ranchers for years." "I know." She climbed onto the wagon seat with steady grace. "But my husband believed water should serve the many, not the few. I won't dishonor his memory by selling out to a bully." They left town as the sun dipped low, Eli riding ahead, while Isadora guided the wagon. The road wound through rough country, past cottonwoods and willows that promised water even in drought. Her husband had chosen well, Eli thought, but when a dust plume rose on the horizon, his hand dropped to his rifle. Trouble was already waiting for them at Willow Draw. The sun was sliding behind the gray hills when the lone rider approached fast. Eli's rifle was already in his hand before the dust cleared enough to recognize Marcus Washington, the freedman who ran a spread north of Willow Draw. "Mrs. Crane," Marcus called as he reined in hard. His face was grim trouble. "Someone dammed up Willow Creek 2 miles above your place. Water's down to a trickle." Isadora's knuckles tightened on the reins when last night timber and stone. "Professional job. Can't prove who, but DVO's cattle are already moving toward the pulled water." Eli cursed softly. "Man who builds a dam in darkness doesn't want witnesses." Isadora straightened Marcus. "Ride to the Holcombs and Spensons. Tell them to meet us at my ranch after dark. We'll need neighbors." Marcus nodded and kicked his horse into a gallop. Eli studied the land. "There's a back trail, hard on the wagon, but safer. Follow me." The detour was brutal. The wagon wheels groaned over rocks, and twice they had to lever it free of a washout. But Isadora never complained. She drove with set jaw and steady hands, her green eyes forward on the hills. Eli found himself reassessing her with each mile. This was no society widow clinging to her husband's memory. This was a fighter. By the time they reached the ridge above Willow Draw, the sun had gone blood red. The ranch spread below. A modest house, solid barn, neat corrals. But the creek that should have glittered silver was reduced to a dying thread. "Timothy built this with his hands." Isadora whispered, "said a man's work should outlast him." Eli's eyes caught the flash of metal where no metal should be. Instinct screamed. He hurled himself at her, knocking her from the wagon seat just as the first rifle cracked. Bullets spat sparks off stone down. Eli barked, rolling behind the wagon with her. He snapped a shot toward the muzzle flash in the cottonwoods. Another rifle answered from the opposite side. They were pinned. Isadora crawled to the wagon bed and returned with a Spencer carbine. Her hands were sure as she checked the action. "Timothy taught me to shoot," said a woman who can't defend herself is planning to be a victim. Her first shot sent one bushwhacker diving for cover. Eli grunted approval and laid down his own fire. For 5 vicious minutes, the valley echoed with gunfire. Then, as suddenly as it started, the attackers melted into the trees, retreating. "They'll be back," Eli said, scanning the treein with more men. They unhitched the horses and rushed for the house. Eli barred the doors and shuttered the windows. Isadora lit lamps and set rifles where they'd be handy. Her face was pale but determined. "They don't want to buy me out anymore," she said quietly. "They want me gone. You don't have to fight this alone," Eli told her. "This isn't your war. Already took the job," he said simply. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise. Maybe hope. But she turned back to her work. Outside, coyotes howled. Willow Creek's dying trickle mocked them both. By dawn, the barn was ash. Someone had slipped through the night and set it ablaze. Only quick work had saved the horses. Among the ruins, Isadora handed Eli a scorched paper found near the fire. It was a promissory note for $500, allegedly signed by her late husband, payable to Silas DVO forgery, she said flatly. Timothy's hand had a curl to the T. "This is crude, but enough for a crooked judge," Eli muttered. He crouched to study the ground. Hoofprints led away, but the shoes had been nailed backward. "An old rustler's trick, Pete Harlan," he said. "That's his signature." They carried the note inside. In Timothy Crane's old study, Isadora pulled a leather-bound journal from a locked drawer, his survey records. He was meticulous. The pages were filled with measurements and maps, but in the margins, strange symbols repeated again and again. Notations Eli didn't recognize. "What are these?" he asked. "I don't know." He never explained. Before they could study further, a knock rattled the door. Through the window, Eli saw Charlotte Beatrice, the school teacher. Charlotte swept inside, crisp and composed, despite the soot and smoke I heard about the fire. "Malcolm Jules is on his way." The sheriff arrived minutes later, hat in hand, eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. "Mrs. Crane," he said wearily, "I have to serve this." He held up the scorched promissory note. "Judge Hartwell says you've 10 days to dispute or vacate." 10 days? Isadora's voice trembled with fury. "The court doesn't convene for 2 weeks. Special session," Jules muttered, unable to meet her eyes. "Hartwell's orders." "Malcolm," Charlotte snapped, "you know that signature is false." "I know," he said softly. "But what I can prove is different. My hands are tied." "Your hands," Charlotte flared, "are your conscience." The room went still. Jules flushed but stood his ground. "I do my duty as written." "Then you've forgotten what justice means," she spat. Eli watched silently. He had seen men bent by hardship before. Jules' wife was sick. DVO had likely bought the man's soul with medical debts, but the sheriff's eyes still carried shame. That shame could be turned. As Jules left, warning them it would be wise to reconsider DVO's offer, Eli turned back to the journal. "These symbols," he said, "they're a code, and I think Timothy meant them as protection." Charlotte leaned over the pages, recognition dawning. "My father worked telegraph. This looks like a cipher." Quote. Together, they began to piece it apart, numbers and angles falling into sense. Timothy had marked certain boundary stones with secret notes, insurance against tampering. Proof, if found that the surveys had been altered. "If we can find these markers," Charlotte whispered, "we can expose everything." Before Eli could reply, glass shattered. Bullets tore through the parlor. The women dove to the floor as Eli returned fire from the window. Riders circled the house, shouting, shooting wild. "They're not trying to kill us," Eli realized grimly. "They're keeping us pinned." Isadora's face went pale. "The markers. They're going for Timothy's cash." Eli's jaw tightened. "Then we beat them to it." He turned to the women. "There's a root cellar that opens into the creek bed, isn't there?" Isadora nodded. "Good. Take Charlotte. Take the journal. Rally your neighbors. I'll draw their fire." "You can't face them alone," she protested. "I don't plan to. I plan to make them chase a ghost." He gave her a tight grin. "Go." She gripped his arm hard. "Don't you dare die on my land, Eli. 2 Rivers. I won't have it on my conscience." "Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am." As the women slipped into the cellar, Eli reloaded, mind racing. He had walked between 2 worlds all his life. Now it was time to use every trick either had taught him. The first rider who strayed too close discovered why Lakota scouts hunted cavalry dreams. Eli's shot knocked his hat clean off, sending the man scrambling. Then Eli melted into the brush, leading the others on a chase they could never quite win. For 2 hours, he ran them in circles, always visible enough to follow, never close enough to hit. By the time the sun sank low, their frustration was raw, and Eli was already moving toward the creek bend Timothy's journal had marked. Whatever the widow's husband had hidden there, it was their last hope. The cottonwoods at the bend of Willow Creek stood like ancient watchmen, their shadows long in the evening light. Eli, Two Rivers moved low and quiet, every sense sharpened. He had shaken off the riders, but they would regroup. Time was running short. At the base of the largest tree, he found the survey marker stone Timothy Crane had described in his coded notes. Eli dug quickly, knife in hands cutting into the earth until the blade struck metal. He pulled free a small box wrapped in oilcloth, its seal unbroken. Inside were 3 things: Timothy's original survey map, a notarized affidavit, and a letter in Timothy's own hand accusing Jeremiah Holbrook, the county surveyor and DVO's relative, of fraud. Hoofbeats thundered. Pete Harland and 4 riders burst from the cottonwoods. Guns ready. Check that tree. Harland barked. Eli slid back into cover, heart steady. He couldn't outgun 5 men. Not here, but he could outthink them. He tossed a handful of pebbles into a thicket upstream. The riders cursed and spurred after the noise. Only Harland and 1 man stayed near the marker. Eli stepped from the shadows. Winchester leveled. Drop your irons. Harland froze, his face twisting with hate. You're making a mistake, Breed. Funny. I was thinking the same about you. Before Harland could answer, more riders appeared. But these weren't his. Isadora Crane led them, Charlotte at her side with neighbors riding close behind. The Spenksons, the Washingtons, Miguel Herrera with his vaqueros. They outnumbered Harland's men 2 to 1. You've lost, Pete, Isadora called. Lay down your arms. The hired guns didn't argue. Outnumbered, they dropped their weapons. Harland spat in the dirt, but Miguel tied his hands tight. From his saddle bags, they pulled damning evidence, forged notes, fake seals, and half-finished maps, shifting boundaries in DVO's favor. The fight seemed won, but Sheriff Malcolm Jules appeared then, grim-faced with news that darkened every heart. DVO's calling it all his guns. Jules said, 40 men, armed and ready. Tomorrow night they ride. He'll claim Indians did it. Say you kidnapped women and children. Judge Hartwell's already signed arrest warrants. Sedition. Martial law. Silence fell. The odds were impossible. Then we don't give him his massacre. Eli said, we vanish. Empty homes, no battle. Let him explain to a federal judge why he brought an army to attack shadows. It was bold, it was dangerous, but it was the only way. That night, families slipped quietly into the hidden caves at the edge of Willow Draw. Lakota warriors led by Standing Bear guided them through snow and storm while vaqueros moved livestock by secret trails. The storm that swept the valley was fierce, but it covered their tracks. When DVO's men came at dawn, they found only abandoned houses. No victims, no battle, only the howling wind and snow. And then the trap closed from the ridges. Lakota horsemen struck, vanishing into drifts after each shot. Homesteaders fired from cover, wounding but not killing. Panic spread through DVO's ranks. At last, Isadora and Eli stepped forward with neighbors at their side. Silas DVO, Isadora called, her rifle steady, her voice carrying across the White Valley. You're finished. Lay down your arms. DVO roared and charged her. Before Eli could fire, Isadora did. Her bullet sent his pistol spinning from his hand and knocked him from the saddle. The cattle king of Wyoming lay groaning in the snow, his empire crumbling. His men broke, some surrendered, others fled, and those who remained were bound and marched into Dry Hollow. Sheriff Jules, his badge shining with new honor, placed DVO under arrest. Days later, a federal judge arrived. Timothy Crane's maps, the forged notes, the photographs Porter Clemens had taken, and the testimony of neighbors told the story plain. DVA was convicted of fraud, extortion, and murder in Timothy's death. The court awarded the water rights not to any single rancher, but to a new cooperative owned by every family who drew life from Willow Creek. The valley celebrated that night. For the first time in months, laughter rang from homesteads, and in the quiet after, Eli stood with Isadora beneath the cottonwoods. "You could have left," she said softly. "But you stayed." "Maybe I was tired of walking away," Eli answered. She took his hand, her green eyes bright with something more than victory. "Then stay for good. Not as a scout, not as a hired gun. Stay as mine." For the first time in years, Eli Two Rivers felt the weight lift from his heart. He had found a place, a cause, and a woman worth belonging to. He bent his head, and when their lips met, it wasn't desperation or grief anymore. It was the promise of a life rebuilt. The waters of Willow Creek flowed steady and strong again, carrying hope through the valley. And for Eli and Isadora, it carried the beginning of a love that would last as long as the land itself.